Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Greatest Games podcast on the Blizzard. My name is Marcus Speller. With me, of course, is Jonathan Wilson. And with us today is Aet Süvari, journalist and presenter for ETV, Estonia's national broadcasting service. Aet, pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Marcus. It's a pleasure to be here.
Today, we go back to 2002 for a friendly match that ended Estonia 2, Russia 1. Aet, why have you chosen this game?
Yes, I did briefly consider the famous game that never was. But of course, since that game never happened, I couldn't choose it. And also I've noticed that British people don't tend to be very objective about it, unlike us Estonians. So I didn't choose that.
You're referencing the game with Scotland, of course.
Yes.
That didn't happen.
I didn't want any fights over that. So I didn't choose it. And I have to confess, I didn't see that game because back then I was still in school. Yeah, so of course I could have also chosen the famous game against Northern Ireland that took us first time and also the only time to the playoffs in 2011. But I think that the game against Russia is really something that has stayed with me, because back then in 2002, I was a journalist, but not yet a sports journalist. I was just a general reporter. So I was there at the match as an ordinary football fan. And I think it just left this profound change or a profound mark on me. And I think after that, I sort of knew I wanted to become a journalist and do this professionally. And also it was kind of a first important, or I wouldn't say an important win, but because it was a friendly match, but it was the first time we had beaten someone who was much, much stronger than Estonia. So it was a huge thing for us.
And I believe there's a bit of history between the two nations, but I'll leave that there. It was certainly a well celebrated win, even though it was a friendly match. Of course, I mean, Jonathan, this is one of those games where I think when you pick this game. Yeah, I thought to myself, this is going to be an educational one, because I'll be honest with you, there's very little I know about Estonia in terms of their national team and in Estonian football. And as loath as I am to be the person to mention Sunderland first for a change, I just think, immediately as an England football, when you think Mark Poom, former Pompey, former Sunderland goalkeeper as well. So, Jonathan, what are your thoughts immediately when we mention, Estonia 2, Russia 1?
Well, I was actually slightly surprised that I hadn't heard of this game before, because pretty much everything I know about Estonian football comes from a conversation I had with Aet in, I think, 2007, before Estonia played Croatia and England in the June, within like 4 days in qualifying, or in England's case, failing to qualify for the Euros. And I remember you telling me a lot about the relationship with Russia. I think just before I was there, there'd been a lot of riots involving Russian ethnicity and things. And you explained to me how football was very important in Estonia's relationship with Russia. And yet, either you didn't tell me about this game, or I'd forgotten about it. But when I looked it up, I sort of realised how it all fitted into this sort of great long sequence of events that you explained to me back then.
It's certainly part of our football narrative, especially what comes to relations with Russia. And when we also played Russia in 2007 in March. So that must have been just before you came over and I told you about that stuff. But I think 2002 must have seemed like ancient history to me in 2007. So maybe that's how I didn't mention it. And yeah, in 2007 it was very charged as well, but not so much. Well, like I said, in 2002, that was the first time we met Russia in football as an independent country. And it was 11 years after independence. And it was before we had started negotiations of entering to NATO and European Union, but we were already very strongly sort of Western-minded. We knew we didn't want to have these associations with former Soviet Union, with Eastern Europe, but we wanted to be more seen as a Western country, as a sort of European country. And so I think back then it was very important for Estonians to sort of, in a sense, try and sever all ties connecting us to the past, connecting us to Soviet Union, and consequently also to Russia. And so when they first came, I think the overall atmosphere was already very, I don't want to say anti-Russian, because that probably doesn't give the right idea. But it was more like, right, you know, we're going to be completely apart from that. We're going to show them what we can do. We are an independent country. We don't let them, you know, roll over us. And there was a march, a sort of a fan gathering, and everybody marched together to the stadium, which in a way the fans still do, but of course it's not as charged anymore than it was back then. Back then it was like a sort of a chance to bring out the flags and to make this sort of political, which I admit didn't give a good sort of pretext to the match. And I remember I was about 24 years old, and I remember that my parents were sort of a little bit worried about me going to that march, because I think there was some sort of sense of danger, and there was riot police and everything, that we didn't know what was going to happen. And of course the fans came from Russia, but also 25% of Estonian population back then was Russian speaking. And you know, the loyalties were divided. I think lots of Russian speaking, ethnical Russians were supporting Russia that day. So we didn't know what was going to happen when we went to that match. But I do remember this being very important, kind of like a sense of national pride, and sort of like you had this sense of like, this is important, this really matters to us, much, much more than qualifying games.
Yeah, it is a fascinating one, because, as you say, people not necessarily anti-Russian, they're just pro-Estonian, and they've not been given a chance to do that over the years. I mean, just to add to that, you know, from 1940 to 1991, Estonia didn't have a national team because they were part of the Soviet Union. So it's been a long, long time. Their first FIFA-recognised match after independence was a 1-1 draw against Slovenia in June 1992. So it's little wonder that this was a, for want of a better word, spicy encounter, Jonathan, because we know that football is a great way, or, well, a way of displaying your national identity.
Yeah, and I think what's particularly interesting here, and I realise the kind of the absurdity of this format we now have, where I'm just going to repeat back to Aet exactly what she told me in 2007.
But we weren't there.
It's called mansplaining.
Exactly. Well, we all weren't there for that conversation, so please, Jonathan.
And do correct me if I've misremembered anything, and I'm sure it is my fault if I do get anything wrong. But you explained to me that football wasn't seen as an Estonian game. So in the smaller republics of the Soviet Union, the biggest team so became almost a de facto national team. So you had Žalgiris in Lithuania, you had Daugava in Latvia, and you had Kalev in Estonia. And Žalgiris were pretty good. They had to, you know, if you tally up all the points from every year of the Soviet Supreme League, they were 23rd, Daugava were 27th, and Kalev were 53rd. They only had 2 seasons in the top flight, and they got a goal difference, total goal difference of -100 over those 2 years. And so the football was sort of, in the same way the football in Ireland was seen as being the sport of the oppressor, so it was in Estonia, and basketball was a much bigger thing, and skiing. And Kalev were, I think I'm right in saying, the final winners of the pan-Soviet basketball tournament.
Yes. Yes.
So I mean, can you? I mean, A, have I got that right? And B, can you explain why football sort of became so important for national self-expression in those years between 1991 and 2002?
Yes, you remember it completely right. Basketball was definitely seen as the Estonian sport. That's what every proper Estonian guy should play, and also girls, because that's what we always played in school. I don't remember us ever playing any football, but always basketball. And also volleyball was extremely popular as well. And then what happened? Why did it become so important? I think, because football is such a universal sport. And then when we could finally become members of the UEFA and FIFA and create our own football team in early 90s, it was also a matter for us. Like, Latvians did it differently. Like, they let everybody come and be part of the national team, but in Estonia it was very important that we didn't have that only the Estonian nationals could play for the national team. We had something so-called grey passport, which is like the alien's passport, which is for those Russians who couldn't get the Estonian citizenship. They didn't qualify, or they didn't want the Estonian citizenship, but they also didn't take the Russian citizenship. So they were kind of like in between Estonia and Russia. They were living here, but they weren't citizens, because in order to do that, you would either have to prove that your parents were living here, or parents or grandparents were living here before 1940, or then you would have to pass language exams. It's quite a complicated process. Not everyone could be or cannot be, even now, Estonian citizen, even if they've lived here for a while. There's like certain procedures that you have to follow. So they had grey passports, lots of Russian-speaking players, especially near the border, near Narva, sort of Russian border. And so they weren't eligible to play for the Estonian national team. Like, for example, Valeri Karpin, the current Russian national team coach, he was born in Estonia. He was born in the border town of Narva. His mother, he's still living there, and he quite often comes and spends time there, because I think he still owns a house or a flat somewhere there. But back then, I don't know if he would have wanted it, but he wouldn't have been able to play for Estonia because he didn't have Estonian passport. Anyway, so for us, it was very clear from the start that this is like, we are going to build this up based on Estonian citizens only. Like, we're going to make this sort of Estonian sports, even though it hadn't been before. Now we're going to do it so that it's going to be. So it was just another way for us to show us being Estonians and showcase our sports, even though in the beginning there was really nothing to showcase for, because we were quite poor. And
well, it's interesting, because I understand what you're saying completely about the sort of the want and the desire to be very, very Estonian. And of course, as I said earlier, 1992 was their first FIFA recognised match. Their first win came in a qualifier, should I say, came in 1996. But that was under an Icelandic coach. So they'd gone for a foreign coach quite early on. Was that seen as sort of controversial, or was that just needs must?
No, not at all. It wasn't seen as controversial, because I think while we didn't want to have anything to do with the former Soviet Union and that bloc, we did want all the foreign know-how to come in, right. The coaches and the facilities. I think very early on, the national team and the club started going abroad for training camps, just to bring in lots of know-how from abroad, not the Russian Soviet Union know-how.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see.
And so, just in terms of sort of football's importance, can you explain a bit about the game in 1980 between the TV station and the radio station, which led to the demonstrations? So, I mean, how significant was that in terms of Estonian self-expression and the move towards independence?
Oh, it was definitely significant. I'm not sure how much they achieved with this. I was only 3 years old back then, but it's definitely something that has lived on in the sort of like national psyche.
But do you want to explain, what happened and then the sort of consequences of it?
I'm not sure exactly that I remember exactly what happened, but there was this kind of like a rock concert, and then there was a punk rock band called Propeller who was singing at the Kadriorg Stadium, which was our main stadium back then. And then after that, there was a football match between. I think it was our radio and TV station was playing against the band. And then I don't think it was about the result at all. That wasn't important. But what was important was what was said and what was implied with it. And it was kind of like sort of ideas of freedom, even though back then it was still like very dark Soviet times, and it wasn't yet the national awakening. Perestroika hadn't started yet. So it was, I'm not sure how much was exactly said, but it was more like implied that we could be free again, we could do this, we could, defy the rules. And
so the fact there was a crowd there allowed us a sort of an anonymity, so people were maybe allowed to express themselves slightly more freely in that very specific context.
Yes, just to show the opposition, but not to put it into so many words, but just to sort of imply that there is inner opposition somewhere, that the people who work in TV, in radio, or the cultural spheres, that they are not completely on board with the whole Soviet Union thing. It was just a way to show this, to express it, and to do other kinds of shenanigans.
All right, let's have a quick break, and then we'll talk about the match itself. See you in a moment, everybody. Welcome back to the Greatest Games on the Blizzard. Now then, knuckling down to the football side of things. Estonia, by 2002, they'd seen, certainly results-wise, a little bit of an uptake in form. They entered qualification for the 94 World Cup and Euro 96. And in those two qualification campaigns, they lost every match bar one draw. So not too good, but of course a country with a small population, not been playing international football again that long. And then qualifying for Euro 2000, they won 3, drew 2 and lost 5 in qualifying. A marked improvement, I think one would agree. And then in 2000, they brought in the Dutchman to appointed as head coach, Arno Pijpers. How important is he seen in Estonian football? At all, is he seen? Was that another move? Because Iceland, of course, as you say, Estonia trying to get in sort of foreign ideas, but Iceland not known, despite beating England at Euro 2016, not known for being a footballing hotbed, but the Netherlands much more so. So was it quite exciting when they appointed a Dutch head coach?
Oh yeah, it was very exciting. It was completely new culture that they brought in, and especially for the football players, I think lots of things changed. The way they trained, the whole thing just became suddenly much, much more professional. And of course, it has had more profound consequences than just that. It didn't just affect the early 2000s, but it has effects even to this day, because even to this day, Estonia is sort of following the Dutch system of training, training new coaches. We use a lot of their know-how, and even though now the FA, when they are training new coaches, are using mainly, I think, Estonian teachers, then up until a few years ago, it was still Arno Pijpers who was doing that. So he has had a lot of influence, and he still has very good relations with the Estonian FA.
Yeah, it's tricky, Jonathan, for a country with, what is it, about 1.3 million, something like that in Estonia, and not a huge amount of history, to kind of get themselves going in an international sense. But they have improved since those qualification campaigns in the mid-90s.
Oh yeah, and I think actually, given all the difficulties, I think Estonia's actually done remarkably well. With such a small population, they could they outcompete other nations of similar populations. And what else can you do? And I think they've got it right by working out what path they wanted to follow 20 years ago and essentially sticking with that. So after Arno Piper's, so when I was there in 2007, the coach was Jelle Hirsch, another Dutchman, who I guess was carrying on, a similar philosophy. So, you can't expect miracles. I mean, Iceland, I guess, shows you miracles can happen, but fundamentally, any qualification will be extraordinary for a country of 1.5 million population.
Yeah. Although I suppose seeing Latvia do it in 2004, that would kind of, people would always think, well, they could do it. It kind of maybe gives a bit of inspiration, hope. But that was a little while ago now. But let's get to the match itself against Russia. And
so, can I just ask before we actually get into the game?
Sure.
You mentioned that there was an attempt to ensure the national team was ethnically Estonian. So of the 11 who started, I mean, just sort of skimming down, were they all ethnically Estonian? Because I'm assuming Andrei Stepanov is ethnically Russian.
Yes, there were a few who were ethnically Russian. What I meant more, not so much ethnically Estonian, but at least Estonian citizenship.
Oh, okay.
So that you know where their loyalties lie. Mm-hmm. That they won't one day just decide to, take Russian passport, for example.
And so the test for Estonian citizenship is fairly rigorous, is it, in terms of having to speak Estonian? And
it is, yes.
Right,
and
okay.
There are certain procedures you have to go through.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The game against Russia. Now, I mean, people would know one or two of the Russian team. There's a few recognisable names in there. With the Estonian side, I held my hands up. I hadn't heard of any of them personally. Most of them played in Estonia. A handful played in Denmark, Sweden.
See, Andrus Opper was linked with Sunderland in 2005.
There you are, and he was very much the man of the moment. And you have to say, based on his exploits in this game, why on earth did they not?
He went to I think he went to Roda in the Netherlands. He was at Torpedo Moscow at the time. I mean, he would Sunderland have had a front in 2005 because that was just before the terrible.
Let's have a reminisce. Have a reminisce.
Just before the Mick McCarthy relegation 15-point season. So lucky escape for him.
Yeah, my goodness. But yeah, so this was, Russia were expected to win, weren't they, this game?
Oh yeah, definitely. Russia was a huge favorite, and I sort of had a look at the old interviews because we have archives here, like what they had said before the match. And there was also an interview with Valeri Karpin, who before the match said that the pitch, of course, is in a very bad state.
And he was right about that.
Yeah, he was right about that. It was in a very bad state. There was no grass to speak of. But
was it really cold? Because I mean, from that footage, it looks like there's bits of snow on the pitch. Or was that?
Yeah, I remember it was quite cold. I'm not sure if there was snow. It was end of March, but end of March can be very cold here. I think it was about like 3 or 4 degrees, something like that. It was cold, and no grass. But at the same time, the head coach said that we don't have any grass pitches in Moscow right now either. So, but of course, I think lots of Russian players were used to much, much better conditions, whereas Estonians were probably more used to playing in bad pitches. And Valeri Karpin said that, I think this will make the game a little bit more equal. But the players were all saying that they sensed the Russians were quite full of themselves before the match, kind of like, this is gonna be an easy job for us.
And so the fact that it was a friendly, I mean, it's pretty obvious watching the highlights that it was a very competitive friendly. Is that fair?
Oh yeah, very, very competitive.
And would it mean more to Estonia than to Russia, or were they really up for it as well?
Well, winning would mean much, much more to Estonia than to Russia. But of course, they didn't want to lose. They didn't want to lose to us. It would have been quite embarrassing for them. But I'm not sure whether for the team it would have been embarrassing because it's Estonia per se. It could be just because they're minnows, you know. But then during the game, there was stuff happening at the stadium where the riot police came and they burned the Russian ultras burned the Estonian flag. And then they took out this banner saying, "The masters have returned." So you can imagine how this felt. And of course, the players didn't see it per se, but they did see the missiles that were thrown on the pitch, but they didn't see, I think, the flag burning and all the banners, but they sensed it. So that must have fueled it even further. The fact that this matters to the people on the stands and people watching this game from TV. So it kind of like changed their attitude to the game as well. It wasn't just a football match anymore. It wasn't just the fact that, oh, we have to win because we have to win. It was more like we have to win because this is against Russia and we have to show them that they are not the masters who have returned.
Yeah, well, we didn't have to wait too long for the first goal in the game. It was only 10 minutes in, and it was that man, Andres Opa, who scored the opening goal after 10 minutes. And again, if you can find the footage of this game, there are highlights on YouTube, and you will see when that first goal goes in that it's not quite friendly, is it, Jonathan? You know, jubilant scenes of celebration.
Yes, it's I think it's Saviok, the sort of blonde-haired, tall defender, and the look of delight on his face, it really is sort of like a 5-year-old on Christmas Day or something. It's like a massive grin when they're celebrating. I mean, we should say that although the footage is there on YouTube, it's quite hard to make out what's going on.
It's a bit tricky.
It gets a bit easier as the light fades later on and sort of there's a bit more contrast for the ball. But picking out the ball from this pitch, which has got these odd pale patches, it might be snow, might be sand, I don't know, it's certainly not grass. It's quite hard to work out what's going on. But anyway, there's a throw in on the right, cross comes in, it's touched on, and Oppa comes in unmarked at the back and converts it very, very neatly. But yeah, the celebrations are not what you'd expect from a friendly. They're significantly more than that.
Yeah, and Oppa, of course, 134 international caps, scoring 38 goals, which makes him Estonia's all-time top scorer. He's not the appearance holder. Of course, how important is he in Estonia, in the Estonian football landscape?
Oh, still very important. He's right now, or he's been in the past few years, but he's also now the assistant coach of the Estonian national team, mainly working with the strikers. And he's definitely very well known, very loved here. And people look up, young footballers certainly look up to him still.
Yeah, well, so, as I say, if not for those 38 goals, specifically the winning goal that he gets in this game. And then the equalising goal for Russia only happens 8 minutes later. Vladimir Beschasnik scores quite a nice finish, Jonathan, if you could make out the ball.
Yeah, well, I think it was him, because again, I don't know why, but the footage is generally quite low quality, quite apart from the issue of colour. So I think it's him has a chance 3 or 4 minutes earlier that Kalman makes a very good save from. But then, he gets his chance after 18 minutes. And very calm, side foot finish. And his celebration, I think, is, although it's far less demonstrative than Oppa's, it's equally significant in that there's that little sort of clench of a fist of, come on, we've sorted this out now. Let's get this silliness out of the way and let's get this done. Yeah. But of course they don't. They do keep having chances, and there's that extraordinary, very close to being an own goal. Again, I'm not entirely certain who it is. It might be Saviok. I'm not sure. The little side foot past his own goalkeeper goes about 2 feet wide.
I can't remember who it was, but I do remember that moment. I remember kind of like heart stopping in that moment, because oh no, it's happened again, because just a year before that we had played Holland in the same stadium, and we had been up 2-1, and then of course everything went pear-shaped after that, and there was this very famous own goal, and so every own goal hurts us profoundly.
But there is that great moment of Kalmar who started to come, And then the pass is just, the player's played blind, and he just can't move his feet, which I think is probably partly to do with the pitch, but partly his momentum's going the other way. And there is that awful moment of, even though I knew what the score was going to be, of thinking, oh God, I can't believe that. Oh, it's gone wide. Yeah. So it just, the way it just sort of trickles wide. It seems to take forever. So yeah, I mean, to be there in the moment and see that must have been one of those really awful sort of 2 or 3 seconds you get.
It was.
Yeah, and as you said, Jonathan, there was a lot of chances. I mean, Estonia had some of their own chances, but as the game goes on, Estonian fans must have thought, hang on, we're in this game. This is there for the taking, and with everything you said previously, but also the fact that they're still in there, it must have made people, the atmosphere intensifies, and people start getting a little bit nervous, maybe.
Oh yeah, and I mean in the second half, I don't know if Estonians got so nervous, because I remember being at the stands and thinking, draw, that is good. I'm happy with a draw. I'll take draw. Which is not what we usually think, because usually every football fan wants to win. But I remember thinking that this is not bad for us, that I will take this. But Russian fans, they were getting nervous, and that's when all these riots started happening, and the riot police had to come in. It wasn't actually enough for the security anymore, so the riot police came in. I think they took about 20 fans away, and you could see it happening on the stands. You could see the fighting, you could see them being dragged out, and there was like the sound of sirens. So you could sense it in the air that they were getting nervous and anxious about this. And at the same time, I think Estonians were sort of like hopeful, but at the same time kind of like, please hang on there, like just don't let them score.
What I found interesting is when you see the footage of the fans fighting in the stadium, there's a moment where the Estonian goalkeeper's net seems to break, and he calls the referee over, and then there's something going on with the net. Did you see that on the footage, Jonathan?
I didn't actually. So you must have seen different highlights to me, because I saw it's about 5 minutes after half time. Suddenly there's a lot of flares. Yeah, and there's some. I mean, this is on the highlights. There may well have been other stuff going on that we don't see. And you see stewards and police are stamping on the flares, and then you see the riot police going into that stand, and I had no idea whether they were Estonian or Russian fans. It was just riot police laying into people. It wasn't entirely clear what was going on. But no, I didn't. So what happened with the net?
Well, I did. The goalkeeper sort of picks up the net in his. It's as if one of the sort of top corners, if you like, has kind of sagged or come down. So it's almost sort of not flat behind on the posts, but it's not sticking out. But the point was, everything just seemed to go off in the stadium, from the flares to the fans, the net breaks, and so on. It's suddenly like, oh my goodness, this is an enormous spectacle, of course. And I mean, what you spoke there, Aet, about how the fans were feeling and so on. But of course, their moment would come 3 minutes from time when that man Opa got the winning goal. And again, if the first goal was celebrated keenly, then the second one certainly was.
Absolutely. I can't remember how the players celebrated, because I don't think I saw it. I think we were just like, we went crazy. I remember that feeling of absolute craziness, which I've never felt since, or never had felt before. It was just like, it was like overjoyous, like this absolute, this crazy feeling of we can't believe this has happened. Not just because this was Russia, but just it was the first time we had done something like that against a much, much stronger country. It was a first big win for us. And I think on that moment, it was like three minutes before the time, we started to believe. I think for the first time, we started to believe that we can play football on a higher level, not just amongst the minnows, but we are capable of winning bigger teams. I think that was the first time this idea, this thought entered into many people's minds.
And it's a hilarious goal.
I was about to say, you're going to take us through it.
So, a Russian defender's bringing the ball out. I'm not really sure why he's doing that. He's sort of running forwards with no apparent sort of destination in sight, and doesn't realise an Estonian's behind him. Puts in this sliding challenge, just pokes the ball away from him, and then there's an Estonian substitute. I'm not sure who it is. Number 15.
It's Roba.
Okay, Roba sort of hooks the ball forward, and suddenly Opper's in the box, free, nobody anywhere near him. And he's, again, I'm sort of imagining myself in the stadium, and there must have been that sort of split second of, hang on, he can't miss this. This has got to be a goal.
Yeah.
But then presumably thinking, oh God, what if he does miss this? This is going to haunt him and us forever. And then he does actually take it very, very calmly.
Because they'd missed one or two chances. I say there's
there's a very good rhyme chance just after the hour.
Yeah.
Where he can't have realised how much time he had, because the ball's, I think it's Zelensky chips the ball into him. And I don't know what's happened to the Russian marking, but he's got sort of, he's in 10 yards of space, and he could have taken the ball down and turned, and he tries to hit this sort of spinning volley and drags it horribly wide. But if Estonia had somehow lost the game or hadn't won it, that would have been a chance to be thinking, God, if only he'd sort of taken the touch.
Yeah.
But it didn't matter, so who cares?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, they run out and 2-1 winners. And again, some of it again on the footage, you sort of think, was this a particularly important qualifier? Have they made it to the playoffs or something like that? But it was just a friendly. But it's so much more than a friendly to Estonia, Aet.
Sure. And like Estonians never really get to feel what it's like to qualify, I think the chances for us, like even that the playoff only happened once, and of course we lost by a clear margin then, and so we've never really experienced that type of joy. So in a way, we have to take what we have, that was this chance where we got to celebrate as if we had won something really important, but we had won something really important, kind of like this game with a real profound importance. We had won it, and that we knew that no one's going to take that away from us. That's going to stay forever in the statistics. It's always going to be there.
Yeah. What my favourite moment of the match actually is when Estonia, they've gone 2-1 up, and obviously you think you sort of hanging on nervy kind of last few minutes, and Opa himself, he thinks, no, I'm having one of those days, and he goes for his hat-trick in spectacular stuff. What is it, like 45, 50 yards out, sees the keeper off his line?
He's on the halfway line, so it must be over 50 yards.
Oh right, yeah, it was hard for me to pick out the halfway line in the footage, but yeah, he has a go, and was it the roof of the net, or he was very close. And what I like about that is it's kind of, that must have given fans that real sense of, oh my goodness, it's party time sort of thing. Like, look at us, we're like bloody Brazil or something. It's one of those sort of spectacular moments where you think, what, did one of our players pull out something like that, or nearly pull out something like that? Absolutely glorious. But yeah, the other thing I was going to ask you, with regards to the celebrations and all, is when the players go to the fans, of course, and sort of clap and whatnot. There's a couple of British flags in Estonian colours that are being draped in the. What's that about? Is
That's kind of like a fan organisation flag, and they still use it. You can still see them in our stadiums. I think. I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's down to the fact that lots of Estonians do support England.
God bless them.
And English clubs. There are loads of Liverpool fans, of course, obviously, and I think Arsenal fans, Manchester United fans. So, and England, Britain being the birthplace of the beautiful game, I think they want to associate them with Britain, and so they made these flags with the Estonian colours, but otherwise a British flag. I think it's kind of like a question of fandom and pride, and like we want to be part of that football culture as well. I think it's the British football culture that Estonians really like and sort of look up to. Of course, not the hooligan side, but
sure. But you can't blame them, Jonathan, can you?
Yes, yeah, I really can.
Being an avid Spanish football fan, I can a little.
Well, there you go. Yeah. Well, perhaps we'll end on that note then. You certainly know your footballing onions perhaps better than some of your fellow country people. But thank you very much for coming on the pod. It's been a pleasure talking to you about this one.
Thank you for inviting me.
For more stories like that, do check out theblizzard.co.uk. But that's it for another week. We'll be back next week with another great game from the history of football. It's goodbye from myself and Jonathan. Cheers.